Hey, it's Chris, Liege Games. Let's do this. I just hammered out a cram session of Valor and Villainy, Lludwik's Labyrinth, in time to get this video up before the Kickstarter ended. So if you're looking at this and going, Valor and Villainy, Chris, now there was a first one, this is the second one. What do you think of this? How does it compare to the first one? What do you need to know? Pros, cons, everything all wrapped into one. Well, tune in because I'm going to try and give you some more insight. I crammed in the full prototype of everything that they are offering in just over 24 hours. So sit back, relax, and reap the benefits of my hard work. Let's do this. Lludwik's Labyrinth. Now, if you're anything like me, when you hear Lludwik, Lludwik is not this guy as the first guy I'm thinking of, right? It's this guy. Well, push that guy aside for a second, and let's go back to the guy in Valor and Villainy. Now, this is the main villain in this version of Valor and Villainy. However, it also introduces several other bosses that you are going to be fighting along your way, trying to get to Lludwik as he is basically running away from you through his labyrinth of caverns and traps and minions, and you are just trying to bowl over them on your way to him. But it's not that easy, and that's an understatement as well. Spoilers. So, what else do you need to know? Well, unlike the first version of Valor and Villainy, this is cooperative, whereas Valor and Villainy originally is one versus all, where one person is the bad guy, the rest are going against him as the evil villain. Mordok, I believe, is his name. And so this is a different rift on it in the same universe using a lot of the same mechanics. Now, you are also going to be able to port over, if you get the right expansion, these bad guys into the other version to do the 1v all and vice versa. So if that's appealing to you already, you should be thinking about it. So what makes this one special? What makes this one different? What do you need to know about the actual gameplay? Let's take a look a minute. I'll just give you a brief overview on this, and then we'll talk about my final thoughts, including what I liked, what I didn't like, and everything in between. Let's take a look. So here's kind of what your starting setup character situation looks like. You have your two characters. They have their trays. They have their health along the left side here. They have their actions along the right side here. And then they have their three other actions that they're going to be doing during their turns. Now, one of which is not listed here is obviously moving. Okay, great. Moving is orthogonal. Straightforward. I'll talk about it a little bit more when we actually look at the map, which is, just out of sight up here on this side of the camera. You can see just the bottom tile right here. But what you're going to be interested in these tiles are the other aspects of things that I just mentioned. This is your melee, this is your ranged, this is your casting or your magic. And so it's really straightforward. This is just how many die you're rolling each time. So in this case, for a melee attack with Isabella here, 1 yellow, 3 white. So all you're doing for her is just going, okay, great. I have 1 hit based on those die rolls because you know me, and rolling on camera especially is always good. But these die are different in the sense that they have different numbers on them and different probabilities. So there's only 1 face, for example, with the yellow that only has a blank, as opposed to 3 with the white. And this one only has 1s on it. This one has a 2 on it as well. And then the reds have no blank sides, but then they have more 2s. They have 3 2s on there. So that is what you're going to be doing. And it's just using these and then mitigating however you so choose. What I mean by that is you're going to run into monsters on the board, and we'll run through just a sample example of how you're battling a monster or how you can divvy up or just how you can deal with a monster on the board. But the other thing you need to know, obviously, is the casting, because casting is done in a little bit different manner. Now, I'm going to take a half step back here and we'll talk about some of the cards that are in view as well. Because these cards are both caster specific, as in Willem here gets red cards. Isabella here gets green magic casting cards. And so at the beginning of their turn or the beginning of the game, they're each drawing 2. And then they just are slotted, and you have a hand size maximum of 6. So at some point that will be an issue, but you're just putting them down here essentially. Not terribly specific for right now, but there are some differentiations. The greens tend to be more buffs and bonuses. The reds tend to be mostly boom, if you know what I mean. So then you just go through. And the interesting thing here that I'm going to talk about, and you can see, is the various card makeup here. So you'll see, for example, this is life cycle. Choose a region. This is a great card because it has everything that we need to talk about on it. It has 3, 4, 6 at the top, so that's how many hits you're getting, and it costs you 1 life with a little 1 broken heart there. Then it says you may choose either 3, 4, or 6 AoE damage, or heal every hero, if I can actually hold this in the camera, on it for that amount. And so what that means is, with those slashes, if you do the first one, it just corresponds to the bottom. 3 hits gets you 3 damage, 4, 4, 6, 6. Now, AoE with this card is a little bit different. That is hitting everybody in that region. Now, a region is also different than just one of these tiles. It is the tiles that are orthogonal to it as well. So it is a big area. So this is a big spell. But this up here is the number of hits that you're rolling with said dice. So, in the case of Isabella here, I'm rolling exactly just this. So I'm rolling this, and you can see she has 4 hits. So I could choose this card up to the 4. Now, however, I could also choose the 3, and then use that 1 additional hit available for one of her other spells. If this was, actually her spell and not Willem's. But, so be it. But for the example. But she has, for example, Elemental Blaze because she summons... she has, for example, Elemental Blaze because what she does is she summons these elemental guys to the board to help you out. And so it's the same thing. The stats for this elemental are either 2, 3, or 4 hearts, life, for the cost of 3, 6, or 8 hits. And that is the basic premise of a lot of these cards, giving you the variability or the adaptability if you don't roll exactly what you need, or deciding to split up because you need several things more than just one big boom. So, now that we've talked about the dice, now that we've talked about these boards, obviously, these white dice are not nearly as good, and there's a whole lot of blank spots. And so that is where the other interesting mechanic comes in. So as you defeat creatures, as you level up, and I'm not going to talk about that too specifically, but each of these creatures and treasure cards that you're going to be acquiring has a value to them. Okay, just kidding. You convinced me to do it. So here you go. Here is one of the gnome boom guns. Okay, here is a gnome boom gun. As you can see in the upper left-hand corner, you have a 2 value of the bounty that it is. Upper right-hand corner is the 3, and this is the broken side because you can also see the broken heart, as well as the fact that you can see a red border around the outside. And then at the bottom, it tells you how it does. It has no melee attack, as you can see there, but it has a ranged of 1 red and 2 yellow. And then it also has an ability. It has 2 actions, the little yellow spot there in the lower left, and then the evade and the AoE, meaning the AoE that I just talked about, yeah. And this is a level 2, as evidenced by the lower right-hand corner. So if you scroll elsewhere, Gnome Chunkatunk. Again, range, 2 actions, level 1. On the broken side, it has 2 hearts, and on the bounty side, it has upper left of 1 gold. Now let's take a look, though, at the other side of this card, the regular side, because the regular side has one other interesting thing, and that is, in the upper right-hand corner, you'll notice 5 hearts to start out with, but it has a 3 with a turnaround, meaning if you can't kill it outright with 5 hearts, you can deal 3 hits or 3 damage to then flip it over to this side, and then need to only deal 2 hearts to vanish it. And then you take this card, you take all of these cards, and they get stored in your treasure pile, essentially. And at the end of your round, the end of the hero's round, you take all of these cards, you sum up the number of gold that they are, and you may only have these, you may have, well, I don't have any out, but you may have some additional treasure cards as well, and you take the total of this, and there is another card in the deck that says, if you have X gold, you get X amount of stars per character. And that is where the leveling up of those characters comes in and is the ingenious, the intuitive, and also the relatively fun mitigation part. And that is where it ties in heavily to these areas on the individual player boards. So for each one of those you have, let's say you get 4. Let's say you have trashed the dungeon this round and you get 4 based on the amount of gold between the treasure you're not keeping, because that's the way it has to happen. Because if you decide to keep it and put it in one of the slots down here, and we'll move these aside for a second, so you can see at the very bottoms of the cards, each character also has a red slot, a yellow slot, and a green slot, a weapon, an armor slot, and an item slot, and they can only have one equipped to any one area. And if you do not want it, you put it in said treasure pile, and then it gets counted for those upgrades. Now, what do those upgrades look like? Well, those upgrades look like this. Because what you're doing, each one of these counts for 1. So to put in a new white die into one of these areas would be 1. To upgrade it, I could get rid of this white and upgrade it if it was already there, and that would count as 1. Or I could upgrade it to a red on the other side, which counts as 1. Now, if I would choose to do just a whole red into that 1, you could see 1 is white, 2 would be yellow, and then 3 would be red. And then if I had 3, maybe I want my 4th point spent like that. All of a sudden, now you can see how I'm getting more dice in those areas. Or if I just want more dies, you know, I just want 1, 2, 3, 4, I might just choose to do that instead. And that is the main way you are upgrading your character. Now, there are 2 other things that you can do to upgrade your character. One is over here on their action bar. Now, I'm not going to use one of the actual tokens because I don't have one out, but we'll just do this. So you start off with 2 actions right here. But if you choose not to do some of this, because each one of these costs 1, if you choose to say only do 1 of your 4 ability points here, we'll get rid of the rest, leave 1 there, you could then take and use the other 3 points to make sure that you get 1 extra action per turn. And why is that important? Because it stays with you for the rest of the game. Not just the round, the game. And that's a big deal. So that is what you're trying to balance. Now, let's say, you know, we talked about that monster, for example. If that monster, let's say you can't even do 3 damage to that one that was the gnome that was flipped over to that side. So you can't even take it out with 3. Well, let's say you only rolled 2. And so if you rolled 2, then you'll see these slots over here at the end. And these are +1 slots. The good guys have them, but be aware, the bad guys also have them as well. So if they can't accomplish things, or the numbering does not work out evenly to what you're trying to do, and you have leftover hits, you can convert those hits for every 2 hits into one of these +1s, which you can use then on this action in the future. So if I have a melee, well, I don't really roll any on melee, but if I have, for example, here, the ranged, if my was only 2 here, then I could put a +1 here. So then the next time I would have a red, a yellow, a white, and ability to increase my hits by +1 if I so chose to use it. Now also, some of these red cards that we were just talking about also can either require a +1 to be discarded of that ability. Now, in this case, it would obviously be the spell casting, but there are, again, specific ones for melee, and then there also are specific ones for ranged. And so they also might require a +1 from only this row. You can't take them from other rows. One of her buffs allows you to just give +1s for free. So, I mean, there are ways to get them otherwise, but again, you have to be creative, and that's how you're going to use one of your actions. Now, the other thing that I did not mention, of your 2 actions that you're starting out with, you cannot duplicate your actions. Moving is an action, and then each one of these are actions. And so if you have 3 actions and you just can't hit somebody because I can't move close enough with Isabella here to melee somebody, well, I might not have a great action. So then you go, Chris, well, what am I going to do then? Well, the neat part about this is, let's say I couldn't melee somebody. Let's say I move as one of my actions, and then I cast as one of my other actions. Well, I can't cast again. I'm out of melee range. You can still roll the melee dice to get +1s for the future. Now, you can't have more than 4 total, but that's helpful for maybe the next round when you see that monster that has 8 health, and you're going, how on earth am I going to be able to get a monster that has 8 health down to its knees or off the board? Then you can see on the side, I have 2 more things of cards. One is this deck right here. Now, this is a special talent that each of the characters have. And you'll notice in the lower right-hand corner here, they each have a character portrait. And they are character specific that you get to start out with. All a little bit different in terms of what they are. Then you have this massive whopper of a deck over here. This is, you know, a lot of the secret stuff that you're going to be pulling out, incorporating based on the quest, based on the mission, and based on what the results are of some of this stuff, as well as a lot of the treasure and just the other spells or components that might be included. And they are in specific numbered order, so, I mean, there's a reason you have to leave them like that so that you can find them and just keep it organized. Now, I've panned up here and moved it around so you can see a little bit of what the actual tiles look like. And so this is your starting base camp. And this same configuration is how you begin the game. And what happens is if you are scouting, which is a free action, if you are moving your character to one of the areas that has open ends, then you are having the ability to scout in the open areas in which there are no tiles that can have tiles placed. Because the other thing is you have to remember that there are tiles that will not be able to be placed, or there are areas where you won't be able to add any tiles because this is also a 5x5 grid in which it's going to wrap around. So I can only put one more this way and one more over here, and these two on this end are going to have to be able to connect. Whether that is with a tunnel or with a wall, it's going to have to be congruent. And it's the same thing in terms of up and down here as well. And the nice thing about the tiles themselves is that they're double-sided. So if it doesn't fit this way, you may just flip it over and it rearranges the tile, although the shape remains relatively the same, so you may be able to slot it in then. Now, these two tiles I'm going to use as the examples because these two tiles have everything that you're going to see that's different on tiles. One here is this little icon. That means an event happens. That means when you scout this tile, you pull the quest off of the pile and read it and go through whatever it says. The next tile here, you'll notice again, has a different shape, a couple walls, but then the interesting thing here is that it has this, and this has the player count. So if there were 6 people playing, I would put a treasure and a minion level 2 down on this tile, but since I'm not, and I did not, I would not. So that is how things get mitigated and get moved around in terms of slotting these. So, I mean, I could put this one here. No, I can't actually. So I could put this one right here because these tunnels match. And then now I have a tunnel over here and a tunnel over here that I could do as well. So I could put this one here and have it match. Now, the issue is I could not, obviously, do that. I could have one over here, but then I would have to have one that would have to match up over here again as well. Now, I could not, for example, put this tile with the wall right here, even though wall and wall would work because it has an open end as well on this end, and this open end would have to wrap around to over here, and it couldn't because it couldn't match. Now, if that was the only tile I had left, well, there's special tiles you can put down in those cases, but most of the time you have a very thick stack of these tiles that you're going to be running through, and so that's not usually an issue because you just move on to the next one. Now, there's one other special tile here that allows you to upgrade an ability that each character has as an asymmetric situation, but I'm not going to talk about that any further. That's all you need to know right now. So that's the basic setup for a hero's turn and what you're doing and how you're interacting. What does the villain's turn look like then? Well, depending on the villain you have, I mean, obviously they're going to be slightly different. In general, the villain's turn is very straightforward. Does this look familiar at all? Oh, it does? Well, it's because it's actually the villains here. Now, you'll notice that the villain has the same 3 symbols in terms of the melee, the ranged, and the casting, but then they also have an additional purple icon there at the bottom. And the villain's turn is very straightforward. First, the villain rolls however many dice it does for the casting, and then it goes to its powers, its casting spells, and you're drawing off the top until you get a total that you cannot cast, and then you cast whatever you was drawn that you have enough for. Then it goes down to the purple icon there at the bottom. And then again, you're rolling the dice depending on what is in this slot because this gets upgraded over the rounds as well. So the villain is going to be rolling more die each rounds. And then you're looking and going, okay, well, I just rolled a 6. So it's going to be, I can summon what level of a minion. And the grunts, if you will, the level 1s cost 3, the level 2s cost 5, and the level 3s cost 8. So I would be summoning one level 2 monster to the nearest portal, and in this case, this is where my heroes are. Then the nearest portal, it goes by the northeast rule, essentially, is the golden rule that they call it. Closest to the heroes to the north and the east, or the portal to the north and the east, and that would be this one. Then they would be spawning here. And villains, for example, spawn in the sense that if multiple ones spawn in an area, the weakest are on the top and then down below. So if you want to fight a level 3, you can't even get to the level 3 until you knock out whatever is on top of it. Same thing with the boss. The boss will not be able to be hit oftentimes until you take out the minions that are surrounding it, which is thematically incorporated and makes sense. After those minions are summoned, though, then the minions go and do those attacks that you saw on the bottom of the cards. Because, you know, they have 2 actions themselves. The first of which usually is move into range. Now, the thing you got to be aware of is, you know, I picked cards that only had melee or ranged. Well, some of these guys, especially the level 2s even, will have melee, ranged, as well as a move, and they have 3 actions to do it. Now you can get ranged then from here, then you can move into here and get melee from here. Now it's usually targeting one person, and you usually get to choose in some manner the defender or who is getting attacked. So there's a little bit of that, but a lot of the times, especially with the boss might say, okay, the guy furthest from the boss currently gets, you know, attacked, or move 9 towards the guy that's furthest, or swap places with the person who's farthest, and then that tile that they just were in, oh yeah, put bombs down, or, you know, have a cave-in happen at the lead or the charge character. And the charge, I didn't mention this, but each round one person's the charge and you pass it around, so either that person goes first or that person goes last, and then you just move around in the circle in terms of turn order. Now obviously with 2 players, I mean, you can choose, because if they go first, then they go first. If they hold, they go second. Anyway, you understand that concept. That is the basic nutshell of what you're doing in this. And a lot of the objectives are go through all of the events, summon the bad boss, and then beat said boss. But if you can't get through all the quests, then it says maybe explore all of the 5x5. I did not also talk about the fact that there are things called sun shards. And the sun shards are going to be set up in these empty locations to begin with. So you're going to be trying to make your way to some of these empty spots in this 5x5 grid to collect them, because during certain missions, it's going to give you certain bonuses, or it's going to help you significantly when you finally go face the boss. And sometimes they're easy to get, and sometimes just the way the tiles come out, it's a lot harder. So there you go. That is the gameplay of Lludwik's Labyrinth in a nutshell. So, now that we've done that, let's go through the list. And let's start, obviously, with what I liked and the pros of this game. The number one thing that cannot be understated, I have 2 books here. I have the campaign book and I have the rule book, right? The rule book is nice. It's relatively laid out. But at the same time, if you know the general concepts, you read it through once, you just kind of toss it aside, because really where the masterpiece is this campaign book. This probably has the best hand-holding to learn the mechanisms of a game through a tutorial, non-tutorial, sort of scenario-based sessions, if you will, that I've seen and that I've played through. So when it comes to the terminology, when it comes to the effects, when it comes to the glossary of items, as you're reading through the rule book and your eyes are essentially glazing over going, how am I going to remember this? Because I did that. I started out reading the rule book. And then I read this and I'm going through the first mission and I'm going, oh, well, where's this mechanism? Well, where's this mechanism? I read all about it in the rule book. Why isn't it there? Well, it's not there because this is slowly layering all of those things. So you're not trying to remember the 3 to 4 steps of the villain turn in the first mission. It's gradually adding it, and then gradually adding it in sizable but meaningful and understandable chunks so it doesn't overwhelm you or your group. Because this rulebook, although well put together, it's not also small. And there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of detail. But it's not overwhelming, but there's just a good amount of it. So the fact that you can do this with this book is great. So that is by far at the top of the things I liked and is a huge pro. You've heard me talk about it, but this next pro I've mentioned in plenty of other videos. Secret envelopes adding stuff. This cannot be understated how great and underutilized of a mechanism this is. Period. And this does it beautifully. And in case you're worried, oh geez, I'm gonna open this one, or geez, I'm gonna open this one, or oh man, what's in this one? They actually say keep the inserts because it tells you what's in each of these, so it's very easy to remember. So you don't have to refer to just a list somewhere else and wondering, okay, which one was this, which one was this, which one was this? No, it tells you exactly what's going in here, both in the campaign book as well as in the insert itself. And I love seeing this. So, in case you want to play this again, in case you want replayability, in case you want to experience another campaign with a different group, or the same group and see what happens and see some of the twists or some of the quests go a different way or items go a different way in terms of how you reacted or passed or failed certain tests, you can. Because you can just totally reset it. I mean, that's what I did. That's why these are full right now in front of me, because I played through them all and then I reset them. And that's great. Because isn't that one of the main complaints you see with the other non-replayable legacy games? Like people go, oh, you know, I have to buy a recharge pack, or, you know, you see those copies of Gloomhaven or Pandemic or My City on secondary market going, well, we played through this a couple times, and you see them drastically reduce in price because nobody really wants them like that if they can't be reset or if they've already been sort of used. And so this eliminates that worry, even from a secondary market standpoint, which is totally superfluous to this conversation, but I'm mentioning it anyway. It's a little thing, but a glossary, a full turn-by-turn thing. Both of the villain phase, the boss phase, all of that stuff is just amazing. The boss has its own character board that you can refill and fill depending on the stats, which make it super easy to change bosses between sessions. And the character sheets are just the same way. And that's another huge pro. One, this insert, this inlay, and two, the leveling up between rounds. I love the fact that you are having these amount of stars based on the amount of killage or loot that you have, upgrading your hero, having to choose between whether or not I want to make these slots better or if I want to increase the actions. Both, how am I going to split that? Because it comes as sort of a high risk, high reward. If you play it safe, you're not going to get upgraded. If you don't get upgraded, you're not going to be ready for that final boss. If you're not ready for the final boss, let me tell you, it's a massacre. And all of these, again, I have 6 playable right now. I say right now because maybe you can unlock more depending on how you play. Spoilers. And they all play differently. Now, I chose 2 to go through the whole campaign with because I wanted to see, okay, what can I do with this? Melee, ranged, both big magic. I like magic. I cast and cast and cast. And the one thing I'll say is this scales pretty well for 2 players. Now, granted, I think the difficulty is higher at a lower player count. So just be aware of that. But if you want a really well-rounded game, this scales, I think, up to 6. Because what you'll see is you'll see these markers all across the boards, the cards, the quests, the missions, all of that saying, okay, well, if you have this much player count, add another treasure here, add another minion here. So I think it scales really well from that standpoint. I also love that maze, that 5x5 looping maze. It's a great mechanism. It's intuitive, it's thinky, but it's not too thinky, and it's just a nice, unique mechanic that I don't really see elsewhere, or I've only seen a few other times in terms of carryover from one end to the other, because they have to match, and if they don't match, then you can't place it, and if you can't place it, that actually could be in your favor as long as it's not one place that you can't get one of those sun shards. Then it's a little bit more tricky. The randomization of pulling those tiles is not a big deal either, because if you just can't play it, you just go to the next one. Can't play it, go to the next one. Can't play it, go to the next one. It just works. The next pro is there is a plethora of these cards that you are pulling from that have abilities that seem somewhat varied especially considering I didn't even see all of the cards. They had cards that were included in this prototype that were for the acts that I don't even have the scenarios for. So just to thumb through those and see some of the crazy stuff that's kind of cool is really kind of cool. Because they work well, it's really exciting getting a piece of those treasures and equipping them. Or making the sacrifice of them to get an additional upgrade between rounds. Now, let's go into sort of the pros and the cons. The ones that could be both ways. I mean, and this is definitely one. Let's just stay with this for a second. Because you get such a loot pile, because you do not have carryover of your characters between sessions, of their equipment, of their abilities, that is a pro and a con, because you get the ability to upgrade your character how you want, or if you want to even change characters between sessions, depending on how you feel about that character. Hey, I didn't like that one. I'm going to go to the new one. Hey, it doesn't really matter because the stats don't carry over, so I don't have to worry about, oh, I lost my progress from the previous one. And that's okay. But at the same time, it's frustrating because you have this character, by the time you get to one of those last rounds, that they're actually doing meaningful damage. They're getting meaningful rolls on those yellow and red dice, and you're beating things, you're doing damage to the boss, and then all of a sudden it's over. And that's frustrating. And also frustrating is because you get so many of these treasures, because they just get added in just like the spells do of your draws. After you draw them from this secret numbered pile, hey, go there and get number 282 and add it to the deck. Well, the problem is you have no guarantee that you're going to get 282 in the next round. And that's frustrating because there are so many cool things that you just might not get to experience drawing from a randomly shuffled deck of abilities when you get the loot, which may only be 3 or 4 max, depending on the size of your party and the size of the dungeon at lower player counts. Other mixed pro-con, what I liked, what I didn't like, it's not easy. This is not easy. If you do not prepare well enough, the boss will wipe you. And it is this delicate balance, and I really like the way it's been done, but I think even the health points on a few of the bosses or a few of the elite tier 3 minions still might need to be tweaked a little bit because they felt a little bit overpowered. Now, I only played at a 2-player count for the whole thing, so it might scale a little bit better when I can have 3 or 4 or 5 heroes pounding away on the final boss. But to be able to do 8 to 16 damage, which is really kind of what it takes, at least 8 damage in a go for some of these elite level 3 minions, is a really tough task when you're trying to get through it fast so that the boss doesn't continually to get stronger round after round, because that's the other thing that sort of goes unnoticed the first time or two you play through. The boss is getting stronger the later you go into the days. And you have 4 days, essentially 5 rounds, of playing until the boss appears, or you lose, or it just happens. Now, another plus minus is the delicate balance there is once you trigger all of the events, then the boss can just appear. So the boss may appear depending on how much you're scouting and exploring on day 2. And that's a massive change because you don't have enough time to upgrade significantly to be able to really go head to head with him. And so the one thing I wish was different, I liked it, but I also disliked it, is that there's no scaling necessarily as much on the boss showing up earlier. Like, hey, if the boss shows up on anything before day 4, scale him down by this many health, or something like that. Because they're still scaling at like the 2-player at like 60 or 65 health, I forget which one it was. But it's a lot. And so if you get them early by you scouting too aggressively because you're trying to get loot cards because you don't have any treasures to equip on your heroes, and you just unfortunately go through all 4 of those events that are in each of the missions right now, that's what triggers the final boss as well, and you're just kind of SOL too. Now, granted, in a lot of these, it sort of is a fall forward, and so that's a good thing and a bad thing because there are consequences, there are some gains, but you're also adding some of these cards then to the bad guys deck too. And I like that. I like adding things to the bad guys deck. But the bad guys still felt slightly overpowered to me overall. Again, speaking from a 2-player count, I did not play at 3 or 4 or 5. And, you know, I'm guessing that changes the dynamic. I'm guessing, as with a lot of these games, the dynamic gets a little bit easier, actually, at the 3 and 4 player count. Now, I don't think I want to play this at 5 and 6. There'd be a lot of downtime there. but 3 might be a very, very sweet spot. Because 2 plays very easily at about 60 to 65 minutes per mission right now. And now I played through the tutorial plus the 4 acts. There are going to be 12 plus 8 side missions, which are basically one-offs, if you will, in the actual pledge. I haven't looked at the stretch goals. But that is what it says in the prototype. Now, the upgrades to the base camp, I also really like this. Because this is, I'll be honest with you, this is the one thing that really mitigated my heroes in terms of being able to start out better and giving them the most oomph at the beginning of those later acts. And now, granted, because I knew there were only 4, there were a couple of these on here that I just didn't choose because they just weren't going to help me. They just weren't going to be as helpful knowing that I was going to do 4 as opposed to, 12 or 15. Then I might have chosen differently. But I love this upgrade because your treasures and bounties give you something between rounds leveling upwise. They also give you stuff for your base camp at the end. And that is a beautiful thing. I love that. It's a great mechanic. The bosses are unique. The bosses taking damage is unique, but it's also, again, somewhat frustrating. Because you can just pull the wrong thing at the wrong time and all of a sudden spawn a level 3 enemy when on day 2 you were just there and there's not really a scaling thing for that. And that's frustrating. Frustrating with the die rolls as well because, this is heavily die-based combat. Now, combat, using the relative as you saw in the example, because you're paying to be able to do some of these spells, for example, differently than the actual, spells. It's not just the straight up damage. You're paying for the cost of the spell and then doing the spell and whatever it tells you to do. And the scaling of the spells means that you have more flexibility in what you want to do. And I like the scaling of the good guy stuff and the bad guy stuff depending on it. The bad guy spawning minions, using their points effectively, wisely. This is really a smart AI system, and it's punishing. It's purely punishing if you play poorly. You really have to be on top of your game with this game. And if you want something that is harder and that is cooperative, this is going to be a very good game. Now, the other question I would go back to say is, okay, well, once you get through these 12 missions, how eager are you going to be played again? I don't know. That depends on your group. Are you going to play this once through and are you going to be done with it? Are you going to want to play this more? Are you going to play all 8 quests? Are you going to incorporate that? There is a little monotony of pulling the cards sometimes and going through and having to reset a little bit. It's like 7th Continent in the sense that if you have to reset this, like I did tonight, there's a lot of work to it. Not a ton. You're just ordering cards, but you just need to be aware. So what are my final thoughts? What's my final score going to be? As you know, I am a person who likes cooperative games. I like hard co-ops. This is a different, nuanced version of things. I wish that you had slightly more time. I feel like the heroes could use another round. I feel like the villains are still a little bit, maybe just need some tweaking on the OP side of things. Maybe even a lower player count, just slight touching up there, or maybe I'm just completely wrong. Again, not having played it all. And maybe at the higher player counts, it's going to be better. But overall, this is a 4 out of 5 for me. Like, if someone pulled this out, I'd be very happy to play this. I'd be very happy to have this in my collection and being able to run through it. Because once you get the gist of it, it's relatively intuitive in terms of the steps, good guys rounds, bad guys rounds. But it is on the harder side of things. And you just have to be aware of that. And again, even though it is resettable and replayable, are you the type of person that's going to want to do that or play one-offs versus a random boss? And if you are, this is going to be an absolutely fantastic game for you, trying to go against these one-offs of these bosses, even outside of the missions or within the missions or side quests, however you want to do it. Because there are going to be a ton of them. And if you just want to run through the campaign, you could easily get, 20 plus hours playing this game, easily, probably just playing the campaign without even any of the side missions. So you'd be well off there too. So, like I said, overall, 4 out of 5, meaning, you know what? Be happy to have this in my collection. No issues, no worries whatsoever. So, there you go. Thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, let me know in the comment section below. Happy to answer any questions that I can, without too many spoilers, hopefully. And then shout out to Skybound Games, who was able to get me this game before the end of the campaign, so I could put this video out before the end of the campaign as well. So, there you go. Hope this was helpful in terms of any last-minute decision making. If so, and you want to see more, subscribing would be awesome. It's the best way you can help me, just by giving me clicks and views. So, as always, have a great day. Stay classy. I'll see you around.